Core Stories, Ordinary Marines, Extraordinary Lives.
Hey everybody, here we go to part 2 with Collin Congleton, and you'll be inspired by him. He's really a very unusual level of intellect here. And he has great ideas about how police departments can be better served by their community, which would help them serve better. So I'll catch you on the backside. Thanks.
I said, "Oh, bitch." So now it was basically
it was on.
Yeah, now it's basically a dare, and so I had to do it. I had no choice at that point. So I applied. I took the LSATs kind of unprepared. That's a whole other story that I won't waste time on, but there were some interesting timing things, and I suddenly had to sit for the LSAT without any preparation, but fortunately it worked out. And
you passed it.
I did all right. I did good enough. I got in. So I got accepted to Rutgers Law School for the class of 2019. I started in August of 2015. Went through Rutgers Law School. Has 2 campuses, used to be 2 schools that are now combined as one school, but 2 campuses. So I went through Rutgers Newark, which is that school, that campus is very, very proud of being the most diverse campus in America, located in the heart of Newark, New Jersey. That in many ways is a great thing. In some ways, for me as an individual, it was a challenging thing, because with everything going on in the last few years, being a white male, cisgender, hetero, cop, Marine, I was just the epitome of everything wrong in the world to a lot of people there. So that made law school interesting. But again, as we discussed earlier, the difficult things you go through in life are so good for you. Anything really worth doing is likely to be difficult, and anything really difficult is usually worth doing. And those experiences ended up being great. I mean, if you want to really learn who you are, go to a place where you're surrounded by a lot of people who think you're a bad person, just looking at you.
Going to school in London, I'm kind of, yeah. But you make a good point in that you learn to choose your battles. You learn the value of negotiation and getting along with people, and who you really need to get along with and who you really don't. I can imagine that in that situation, a law school student in a very diverse university setting, that you gained skills that you really probably wouldn't have gained anywhere else. That certainly you will use as a lawyer, because the Marine Corps teaches some little tiny bit of charm offensive, but it's definitely needed, being able to negotiate and be easy to get along with. An attorney, it's a great skill. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I made some great friends there, and something happened that ended up being very relevant to everything going on right now. We're in the midst of all these protests that were sparked by the incident involving George Floyd, and there's these calls for defunding the police and so on and so forth. This was starting to happen in a significant way when I started law school with the incident involving Mike Brown. And so some of my classmates were very involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, and I wanted to understand that better. And I wanted, as a cop, I knew that I wanted to be involved down the road with policy and with improving not just myself as a cop, but improving my profession, improving my agency, the guys that I work with. One of the roles that I work in is as an instructor. And so I wanted to be better at that. And so I sought out opportunities to engage with people who are involved in that movement so that I could better understand it and understand what the real gripes, if you will, and not for lack of a better word, what were the issues at the heart of it?
Yes.
And I got very close with a couple of classmates in particular, and we put on an event that we called Are You, for Rutgers University, Are You Black and Blue? And it was one of my classmates who was very involved in Black Lives Matter, myself, and a moderator who was a young Black woman whose father and uncle were both police officers. So she was an ideal moderator.
Yes.
And we had this town hall style panel discussion where we discussed the issues that were going on at the time. And I was very proud of that. It went really well. And I wish that we could have more of that, because I think that the conversation that we had there for the people who were part of it, I think it was very valuable.
I can imagine it was very unusual, but also from my perspective as a communications scholar, communications never hurts anything. It can only improve high conflict situations, which is what you're describing. Yeah.
And from my perspective, so now currently I serve as a sergeant in the Jersey City Police Department. I'm in the patrol division, so I'm a boss out on the road in charge of guys, and I basically am the supervisor for a precinct for all the guys on the road, usually on the midnight tour. And
blimey. So you're sergeant supervisor on the midnight shift.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. In addition to that, I'm a FBI certified hostage and crisis negotiator, serve as a team leader on the Hudson County Regional SWAT team for the negotiations section, firearms instructor, active shooter instructor, like instructing in a number of capacities. So communication is always essential, whether you're dealing with a barricaded subject or you're dealing with a cop as their supervisor, or it's interpersonal relationships, or it's a national level conversation about policing in America. Communication is absolute. And one of the problems from where I sit as a frontline supervisor in an urban police department, as far as communications go, is that oftentimes the people involved in this conversation are too involved in politics. It's usually your police directors or chiefs who are politically appointed and who are often very concerned about keeping their job and saying the right thing and not upsetting their political boss or whatever the case may be. They're cautious, and they're also, and this isn't to say that there aren't chiefs and high level supervisors or upper level management out there that aren't good cops, but most times they're so far removed from the street. If you're talking to a director or a chief, they're usually 10, if not 15 or 20 years removed from really being out on the street. And you combine that with the political issues that I just mentioned, and you're gonna have a very different conversation with them than you're gonna have with a frontline cop or supervisor. You know what I mean?
So let me ask you a question then. I completely value that you are coming to street interaction, street conflict, interacting with people on the worst day of their lives, many of them, with a tremendous amount of wisdom and knowledge that your leaders in your chain of command perhaps don't have, likely don't have. How welcome, I mean, if they made getting to be sergeant supervisor is no walk in the park. So it seems to me that although they may not be in that situation themselves, they welcome what you bring into the community. They're welcoming your skill set, your knowledge set at this time. But I wonder, is there any hope for change in the leadership to to have much more, embrace what happens on the street from a perspective of law knowledge and community relations. Although that's a hot topic. I don't mean it that way, just in general terms. Yeah.
So you touched on something, and that was law knowledge. And I don't want to shift gears too dramatically, but something I think is really important in this conversation about policing, and that's education. And when I started out as a cop, I didn't have a college degree. I had a high school diploma. And over the course of my career, I'm 17 years and some change into it now. I've been very fortunate to have a tremendous amount of training and education, and not just formal education as far as college and law school, but education in policing. But that wasn't by accident. It was deliberate. I pursued that aggressively. One of the big problems I see is that while the job has changed dramatically in the last almost 20 years, never mind in the last 30 or 40 years, the training has not. The requirements have not. The job is not keeping up with the times and what's expected of us. And we're doing a disservice, not just to the communities we serve, but I think even more so, I would argue, to the men and women who are asking to do that service, to do that job. We're not arming them with the proper tools. We're not giving them the training and education that they need to do the job, the difficult job of policing in America today.
Yeah.
So education is a huge part of that. I would not have said 10 or 15 years ago that having a college degree would make you a better cop necessarily, because, and I think a lot of Marines would agree with this. I hope you would. Not to be harsh, but I know a lot of people with degrees who are not terribly bright, and I know a lot of really brilliant people who don't have a formal education, who don't have degrees. I wouldn't equate education with intelligence.
Right, of course not.
That being said, education is so helpful, if for no other reason than it improves your ability to communicate.
It improves your ability to communicate, but in almost every university, even highly politically influenced universities that are slanted to the left, to the right, which exist out there all over the place, there still is a requirement, a demand, and an expectation that you will leave there much more open-minded than you arrived.
Yes.
And that's certainly been my experience.
Absolutely.
And that, so here you are now, as you call yourself a warrior scholar, which I love. I eat that term up. I love it so much. But now you're in a position where you're seeing the need and you've identified a way to improve that. Now, just to kind of just validate what you just said, I know a lot of cops who have a bachelor's degree. Many cops, as they move along, earn a bachelor's degree, and I would think that every one of them would agree with you that it has improved their ability to communicate in their job. But what are your thoughts? What is the plan now? Do you have some thoughts about, and maybe activities planned to perhaps improve this situation for the police officers out there who are not receiving the training that they deserve, certainly, but also especially in a time where the police, and this season is cyclical, it seems to me. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, there was a season where the police were under great scrutiny.
Yeah.
So it's although it's happening right now, I think as this podcast ages, the situation will also have returned.
Right.
So in general terms, I'm hoping that you have a scheme in mind.
Yeah.
Come on, give it up.
So there's a few things I want to do. One of my problems. I guess it's a problem. I don't know. It's a good problem to have, is that I still haven't really figured out what I want to be when I grow up. So there's so many things that I want to do, because there's just so much out there that's worth pursuing. One of the things that I would like to be able to do with the law degree is to get involved with litigation involving officers who are accused of excessive force. I have a unique background in that I have all these instructor certifications as firearms instructor, defensive tactics, and so on and so forth. I've been involved in a number of critical incidents on the job myself, and shootings and things of that nature. So I have the experience and the qualifications paired with the education, where when somebody has been accused, either rightly or wrongly, of excessive force, I would like to be involved in that as an expert witness, essentially, to be able to come in and evaluate those scenarios and give an opinion objectively based on facts as I view them from my perspective with all of this background. Along the same lines, I would also really love to teach. I want to help people understand these types of incidents and to understand the challenges of policing and the things that are being discussed and debated in our country right now. So I've applied to NJCU for an adjunct professor position in the criminal justice department. Right now with this COVID stuff, everything is on hold, so we'll see what happens with that. But I've found through my experience as an instructor, I found that I really have a passion for teaching. And so I'd really like to pursue that. Even if it's just part-time as an adjunct, I think that could be valuable for myself and for those that I would have the opportunity to engage with in a classroom. I would also really like to get involved in policy and in transforming my profession as far as changing the standards. The police academy, just as one example of what I'm talking about, the police academy has been roughly 22 to 26 weeks, depending on what county you go through and all of that, whether they offer an EMT certification or not. There's a few variables, but it's usually somewhere between 22 and 26 weeks. That hasn't really changed in probably 30 years. And you talk to guys that are retiring from the job, that have done their 25 years, 30 years. The academy was 22 weeks when they went through. And what I've seen from talking to guys is there are many more boxes to be checked and many more areas covered, but they're just cramming more and more material into the same time period, I don't believe, not allotting the appropriate amount of time and attention to a lot of the subject areas that need to be taught, the law being one of them. People look at a lot of these, everything is on video now, and people look at a lot of these incidents, and you have lawyers evaluating it, you have the public evaluating it, and say, how did this cop get it wrong as far as the law goes? Well, how can you expect a cop who got a 2 or 3 week block of instruction on the law to be out there in the street making decisions like a judge would while they're under stress with absolutely minimal education and training?
Right.
That's not a fair expectation. It is fair that we have gotten to a place where we expect and demand more of our police officers. What's not fair is to impose that expectation without giving them more training and education. So that's something that I think really needs to change, and that I hope to be able to get involved in.
Well, I love that you unpack that so well. I think that, perhaps most people don't know much about how police officers are trained. And you're right, there is a tremendous expectation, and they are under constant observation from the public, not just leadership and not just their community, but the entire public.
Yeah.
And they really are just ordinary people.
Yeah.
I live, as a matter of fact, we have had sort of a turnover in police chiefs in the last 10 years, but for a while, our police chief had come from Newark, New Jersey. And because I'm on here with you right now, I can't call his name, but he was with us for, I think, 3 years. And then he moved up to Montgomery County, Maryland, I think, which is, a whole different thing. But I just have a town of 100,000 people and surrounded by towns of 100,000 people here in coastal Virginia. And policing here is very different than policing in major cities. There's just no two ways about it. We may have 40 murders a year here, but we have a whole lot of nickel and dime crime.
Right.
And that's very upsetting for this population, which is basically a military population. The largest Navy base in the world is right here, Portsmouth, the Naval Hospital and the shipyard NOB. So there's also a perspective that where a police officer will be serving, I don't think factors very much into their training, and it should. Police in Portsmouth, Virginia are not going to encounter the kinds of problems that police in Newark, New Jersey are going to encounter, as well as cultural norms and mores for the community. I think that is something that is often a problem. Occasionally I've encountered a police officer here who has come from another culture, and they're unfamiliar with our customs, and they can come across as offensive because they are unfamiliar with them. And so there is, just from a communications perspective, in my tiny little lane of that, I can see tremendous room for improvement, much less on much more important things, like you're talking about with respect to the law and knowing the law and sort of being able to communicate and negotiate better with people in the community on the subject in a crisis situation.
You touch on a really important point there, and that's that policing, every community is unique. When we have these conversations about policing in America, the vast majority of the time people talk about the police as this one giant entity, and they're all the same. Every single agency has its own culture, has its own SOPs and policies and customs. The agencies are each as different and unique as the communities that they serve. And so, just as one example, to take this call to defund the police, maybe in some communities, possibly, that might be a reasonable conversation.
Right.
It may be appropriate to say, how are we spending our funds in this community, and is there room to take some of the money that we're putting into the police department and put it into other programs? That might be reasonable. In the city where I work, literally 99% of the budget is salaries. There is very little money spent on training, on equipment, on things other than just paying guys to show up to work. So when you talk about defund the police, in my city, in my agency, what that means is shrink the police department. Because if you shrink the budget, that it is an inescapable reality that you're going to have fewer cops.
The direct proportion.
Right. And where I work, given the circumstances right now, that would be a terrible idea. And ironically, the people who would suffer most if that were to happen would be the people of color in the worst parts of the city, where they need the police the most. And I think that it's really unfortunate that the conversation is often dominated by the vocal minority, who I think often have more extreme views or views that are more towards the end of the spectrum than a lot of the people who would be closer to center. many people in those communities are demanding, if not begging, for more police in their community. They want to see beat cops. They want cops out there walking around, which is great. But first, you have to have enough cops and cars that can respond quickly just to the high priority jobs that are coming in. You have to be able to do that.
Of course. I don't talk about it very often, but I'm trying to sort of integrate it more. Much of my work writing about Marines these last 22 years has been inspired by their courage and the courage of the ordinary Marine I've encountered in my life. But it's because I've survived a lot of trauma, and I've been a victim of random crime and not so random crime. And there have been times when police officers saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no two ways about it, and the life of my child. So I'm a little bit biased in the sense of I would be dead, certainly, more than once, if the police did not respond when I needed them at that exact moment. However, I wonder if you see, and your thoughts about the what I believe is a cycle. There's a terrible event that's publicized, and there's outrage and outcry and demands that are born of tremendous immediate frustration. Mm-hmm. It's very real and very fair, but it dies down to a place, a cooling off. And I wonder if you see value in that cycle, and in this particular season, what your thoughts are about the topic of defund the police as it cools off. Like you've said, you see it as something that should be localized, considered on a local level, not any kind of a broad level, which I think everyone agrees with you, that there's degrees of this. But also, what can be born from your knowledge and perspective? What can be born of this season that would benefit, that perhaps isn't being talked about quite yet, that would benefit both the police and the community after this national tragedy and trauma? Yeah.
So one of the complaints that I've heard more recently in relation to this cycle, as you put it, is that, well, nothing has changed. And I don't think that that's a fair assessment. I think when you look at, when you evaluate policing since, I think it's probably fair to say that Ferguson, Missouri and Mike Brown was a tipping point. That was the first major incident in our modern era that spurred a lot of this. So if you were to take stock of what has happened since then, to say that nothing has changed, I don't think is an accurate assessment. It's a fair complaint, and perception is reality. And so if that is the perception of a lot of people, then that is their reality. They're angry because they feel nothing has changed.
Exactly.
But that perception, I think the responsibility for that lies with our leaders, both political and the leaders in policing, need to get out there and explain to people how we are changing, because we are. The cameras being just one example of many. That was something that was emerging at the time as a new technology and is now really the standard.
It's mandatory, really.
In most places,
yeah.
It's mandatory. And that was spurred by starting with Ferguson and the incidents that have come since then. That has become the standard. So that's just one example of many changes that have occurred. So to say that nothing has changed, I don't think is accurate. That being said, obviously people want more change. And so where we've changed thus far is not enough. Where do we go from here? And now we're faced with some important questions and some real challenges Obviously, I already put it out. I think that the standards for training and education need to be one of the big changes. That's something that to some degree has to be evaluated on a more local level. For New Jersey, there are state standards. You have what's called the PTC, the Police Training Commission. That is a state entity that establishes standards for training police officers, and then that gets pushed down to the county level. New Jersey is kind of unique in that we are made up of a lot of municipalities, a lot of small towns. So we have counties, but we don't really have county police for the most part, like you do in many places in the South or out West. We have municipal police officers that are responsible for the bulk of, and so your municipal police officers get sent to a county police academy who gets their standards from the state PTC. There's no federal standard outside of federal law enforcement. There's no nationally accepted standard for training in policing. That's maybe something we need to look at.
Is that something you would participate in and may pursue?
I would love to. I would love to. I hope that if I continue pursuing the training and education, if I continue the path that I'm on, that I'll get to a point where I could be looked at as somebody who should be involved in that conversation.
Well, I think you could turn that around, Collin. Turn that around and do it. I mean, I don't know anybody who would be a better candidate to at least initiate the conversation and order of it than you.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll see what happens. It's one of the things on my to-do list, if you will. So we'll see. But it's funny with that stuff. There are a lot of people who want to be involved in the conversation, and I think a certain amount of that is luck. And as Marines, I think many of us believe in making your own luck through preparation, and that's something I'm working on. But a lot of it is just dumb luck, being the right person, but also being in the right place at the right time. There are a number of factors that you just can't control. So I'll focus on controlling what I can and preparing myself as much as I can, so that when opportunities arise, I can meet them. But we'll see.
I'm going to do something that Marine officer did back then, and I'm going to say, okay, well, Collin, of course, you just wait for your moment to arrive, because God knows you can't make it happen. They've laid down the gauntlet for you. I mean, I don't see any barrier to you reaching out to a federal level and saying, look, I know this patch of turf really well. We have got to consider making a federal standard for local police. We've got to. And you certainly are not the first person to bring that up in the recent 2 or 3 weeks. But again, you come to the table with such experience and scholarly knowledge, and so I don't know who could be a better candidate to.
One of the ways that I'm hoping to break into that conversation, to be a catalyst for some of these changes, is starting local. And I think that I may be in the right place, and now may be the right time. Jersey City is an amazing place, but for many reasons, but chief among them, it's been listed as the most diverse city in America for a number of years running. It really is an amazing cross-section of America. It's literally the gate to America in a lot of ways. I mean, Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty are associated with New York City. They're in Jersey City.
Right. That's right. It is an ancient, it's really, in American terms, not anywhere else in the world, but right. For America, it is an ancient melting pot. Jersey City is. I mean, I don't think anybody is unaware of but the opportunity, the number of cultures which are a first generation there remain that way, but also the opportunity that so many entrepreneurs in that city.
Oh yeah.
And so
there's so much going on, and so my point with bringing that up is that if there was a place that could be a model and an example for other places in New Jersey and across the country, I think it's Jersey City for a lot of reasons. And not a big city model like New York, where things that are needed there or things that would work there wouldn't necessarily apply in other places. It's a mid-sized city that where you would encounter everything and anything that you might encounter just about anywhere else in the country. And so I think that it's a great place to try to set the standard. If we're talking about standards, that's a great place to start. And at the state and local level, one of the things that I've seen that kind of, it bothers me, but I see it as an opportunity. When you look at many other professions, the legal profession, for example, attorneys have to accumulate continuing education credits throughout their career. Doctors have to do the same thing.
Nurses, every license.
EMTs, you have to continually attend training and education throughout your career. That's not required for police officers. Why not?
Right.
Why is it that obviously the biggest issue with policing is use of force right now? You go through defensive tactics training in the academy. That is a perishable skill. Any Marine will tell you, anybody who's ever done combatives of any kind will tell you, that is a perishable skill. You need to maintain that skill set. As a cop, you get it in the academy, and you don't ever have to do it again. There's something wrong. Yeah. There's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
And again, it's not fair to the cops that we're asking to do this job, because how can they be expected to go out on their own time and on their own dime and put in the time and the effort to do that training when they're being forced in many cases to work overtime because we don't have enough guys out there on the road. They're doing all kinds of other things on top of they're human beings. They have families, they have other obligations. We need to make that part of the standard. We need to establish a requirement for continuing education throughout your career. You need to go and get a certain number of hours or credits annually in defensive tactics, in legal education, in negotiations, or de-escalation, if you will.
So what you're proposing really is very reasonable, but also it could be done in the same way that the medical and other professions allow it, so that it wouldn't interfere with your earning your income or interfere with the hours that you need to. And first of all, I didn't know that was the case for police officers, that they didn't have any kind of a continuing education demand requirement.
And in some places it may be. Sorry, not to interrupt you. In some places it may be. In New Jersey, it's not. In many places, it's not.
So the other thing is that what you're talking about here is really, when I kind of needle you to go big with this, you're saying, but if I could set a precedent here.
Exactly.
Then
if we can start here and say, okay, here's a model that we've created that we're implementing in a place like Jersey City that's working. And this is a model that could be emulated by other places.
And you could study it. So you could study it as it progresses and years out, and then you could determine the actual, not outcome, but impact of it, and see if it does make a difference. And I feel it certainly couldn't hurt. And like with these other professions, you could have a variety of different trainings that would appeal to the talents and interests of the different police officers that you have. So I think it's fascinating, a fascinating plan. So when are you putting that in place, Collin? How are you chasing that down?
So it's It's one of the reasons that I thought a legal education would be helpful. It's one of the frustrations that I've dealt with is you can have the greatest intentions and you can be qualified, if you will, but a lot of times credentials are important. If you want to be heard, the initials in front of or at the end of your name, sometimes they matter in being heard.
So we have gone through so much today, and I've learned so much that I didn't know about you and policing, but also a little MAP 7 history that I was unaware of. I value what you're saying here about thinking about using the community you're in as sort of a starting place to consider improvements. And I'm sure that you would not have come to that had you not pursued the education you have. And again, I didn't realize that you kind of have this perspective that you have been given an opportunity at life, that you, because of your combat service with 325. It's a very illuminating podcast for me, and certainly, I'm sure, very inspiring to Marines. I think that many times Marines do believe that they kind of have to follow a certain path, but want to do something else. And when they hear a story like yours, they can say, hey, maybe what's kind of nagging at me to pursue is not so unusual. And maybe it is absolutely what I should be doing, because it's bugging me that I'm not doing it. Like you were saying about learning, about how much you just really want to learn. So thank you, Collin. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's been a great honor.
Oh, likewise. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I would just say, as a closing remark, if you will, you touched on something about Marines sometimes feeling they have to go a certain route, whatever the case may be. If there's one thing that I think all my brother and sister Marines should agree with, it's that we can do anything. I mean, that you look at our history as a Marine Corps, as the United States Marine Corps, and the people who have gone before us, who have done just such incredible, inspirational things that give us the fuel to push forward. There's no shortage of examples from any generation up to the present. There should be no doubt in the mind of anybody who's earned that title that you can do anything. You just have to decide that you want to do it, whatever that may be. And you have a tremendous family around you, wherever you are, that will help you to do it, that will be beside you and help you in any way that they can. I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate in that I've encountered Marines along the way who have helped me, who have led me, who have inspired me, who've helped me in a number of ways. And I do everything I can whenever the opportunity presents itself to help my fellow Marines as well, to pay that back. So whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, get after it. Go do it. There's nothing that can stop you, and there are so many of us out here that will help you. So perfect.
I love it. All right. So Collin, I thank you so much.
This was fun. I wish you a lot of luck. I hope it is successful. Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Take care.
All right, y'all. Wasn't that super inspiring? I find him very inspiring. And again, he's definitely somebody you would want in the trenches with you. Anyway, Semper Fidelis, hit subscribe, and thank you.
Core Stories. Ordinary Marines, Extraordinary Lives.